Library Association. This brief slide that I'm putting up here gives you the background on the program. So this is going to be one of those rare times when I will go silent for about 20 or 30 seconds so you can read that, and we'll take that down, and then we're going to dive into some fun. So here goes. I do want to note that although that standard slide says that the sessions always start at 10, next month, the September 2023 session, Library Advocacy Basics, we're going to start 1 hour later to accommodate somebody that we wanted to have on who could not join us earlier. So the September 2023 session will start at 11, and it'll be a 2-hour session running from 11 to 1 Pacific time. Otherwise, you can pretty much rely on us being here the second Wednesday of the month, 10 a.m., until somebody decides that it's time to move on. So with that said, let's take the slide off. Let us look at each other, and let's get down to the heart of the idea of steps to successful lifelong learning and advocacy. For me, it always starts with setting something up that meets somebody's need, whether it's for ourselves or for somebody else. We define a need, we decide how we can address that need, and we circle around afterwards to make sure that the need was met. One story illustrates for me illustrates for all of us, I think, why I'm such a bulldog on saying, get those needs defined up front. Years ago, when I was running the training program for the San Francisco Public Library, I had wonderful colleagues there who would stop by my office and tell me about what they needed and what they wanted to see out there. So one of my great colleagues, who was a wonderful source of information, mentioned that she thought a great course for the staff at the library would be a course on what to do with the basics of computers if you hadn't any formal training on them. And so we playfully named the class What I Wish I'd Known Before I Turned the Computer On. Worked on that thing, designed it, rolled it out. We had 850 employees in the system at that point. And much to my surprise, the day of the event, I walked into the room and there were only 4 people out of 850 who showed up. And of course, you can see where the story's going. The person who asked the course was not one of those 4. So I taught the course. We had a good time. One thing you learn in training, teaching, learning is it doesn't matter whether you've got 1 person or 1,000. The person that's there needs you, and you are not a rock star, so you're not there for the numbers, you're there for the people. So we had a nice session, but afterwards, of course, I was curious. I went back to my colleague who had requested. I said, so what gives? We had the session, you weren't there. And she said, oh, no, I didn't need that. I just thought other people did. So our starting point is always when we start talking about training, teaching, learning, and lifelong learning for ourselves and for others in advocacy, first thing to do is make sure we are addressing a real need. We want to make sure that what we're putting out there is helping people in a way that they want to be helped and is concrete. And we'll go through that in a 10-step process today. But to kind of get us a benchmark, let's turn this back to all of you. And let me start with a question to you. You can either unmute yourself and just jump in and respond to it, or you can put it in chat and I'll read that for people who may be watching the video later and not see the chat function. So the question is, what do you currently do to improve your own advocacy skills? Let's see what your starting point is. What do you currently do to improve your advocacy skills? Anybody? And Lori's putting into the chat lots of listening, which is a great thing. Lori, where are you doing your listening? Who are you listening to, and what are the settings for that? Formal meetings mostly, that's great. A point to be made here is a lot of us do get that, and we see our training programs in libraries as well as in advocacy programs. The trainings are in sessions like this where they're formally planned out, you have your goals, your objectives, and a lot of money is put into making those things happen. The interesting thing for us is that if we look at how people learn in their workplaces, all the research I've seen suggests that upwards of 90% of the learning is informal. It's colleague to colleague, peer to peer, or just grabbing things when you need it in that moment. And it raises a question for us, of course, that I ask that myself as somebody who does a lot of paid training in a formal setting. If 90% of the learning is informal, why are we not putting more resources into that? And it's a great thing that we ought to be considering. But to go back to Lori's point, you do want to listen, you do want to go to those opportunities and find them where you can. And that's, again, something we'll explore a little more depth as we go through the session today. Catherine says she learns as much as she can through news, through webinars, and colleagues. Colleagues are a great form of support, especially if you are in circles like the ones that you can travel through the California Library Association or the American Library Association. California Library Association, as I mentioned before we started the recording, actually has a legislation and advocacy committee where the people from all over the states who are on that committee look at legislative issues, build coalitions. We have a paid lobbyist through the California Library Association to work at that level when it's a legislative issue, rather than some other sort of advocacy thing that you're working on that is not involving legislation. But we have those resources. So colleagues are all important. And a point I'm going to make over and over again today is it comes from having communities of learning and communities of practice. Leaving the jargon aside, just means knowing people who share interest and having access to them, as you have through a session like this, as you have through the California Library Association, as you have through other library consortia, and again, the American Library Association. Catherine added that she has informal conversations with others. Anybody else? How are you improving your advocacy skills? Again, not to pressure you because I want you to be comfortable in the session, but if you're comfortable turning on your camera, please do that and unmute yourself so that we get the conversation going here at a level where you can bounce off each other as well as off me. And there we go. Lori's saying bouncing ideas off others. All these things are great, primary, wonderful starting points. And since you know these, let us start with a few of the basic tips. Tip number one is, as I alluded to in the story I told at the beginning of the session, first, in any kind of learning situation, identify the learning problem. A colleague of mine who you're going to hear about several times today during the session, his name is Sardik Love. Sardik is S-A-R-D-E-K, and you'll want to look up his website online because he's a wonderful presenter and a wonderful advocate for learning. But what Sardik tells us, and what I see myself, is identifying the learning problem comes from asking ourselves, or the person that's coming to us for help, what hurts? What's the pain point here? What is it you're trying to cure? If your advocacy learning problem is as simple as, I don't even know where to start because I don't know how advocacy works, then you identify the learning problem as, I need to identify what my resources are. And that in terms of training, teaching, learning, we talk of goals and objectives. People use these terms in many ways. The way I'm going to consistently use them today is, a goal in learning is the broad thing. I want to be a better advocate, or I want to know more about advocacy. The objectives are where the rubber meets the road. Those are the concrete steps you will take to make that goal happen. For example, if you say, I want to know more about advocacy, one objective might be, I want to be able to identify 3 websites that I can consistently go to for help. And if you want to be even better, you make those things in a time, you set time limits, and you make ways that you can evaluate whether you were successful. So really starting with the goal of, I want to be a better advocate, that objective of, I will identify 3 websites I can go to, and I will identify these within the next week. That gives you an action plan. And in terms of the broader picture of training within advocacy, or even in any kind of a library training program, you set this up so that at the end of it, you can see whether you were successful. It's the evaluation phase. The point I'm making here is, by identifying the learning problem and setting up goals and objectives that are very specific, you are already setting up an evaluation tool afterwards that you can use. So if our goal was, I want to be a better advocate, an objective was, I want to know 3 things within the next week. At the end of the week, you ask yourself, did I find 3 sites? Success. It's very easy. People seem to think that evaluation and training and all the design work needs to take hours and days, weeks and months. Sometimes it's not that complex. So don't let that overwhelm you. Identifying the learning problem up front is a major part of making sure that this works at an individual level as well as with the people you work with. And that takes us to tip number 2, which ties right back into the idea of, once you identify the problem, tip number 2 is, describe the result to be achieved. If we set up something like I want to be a better advocate, and the result is that I want to be better at advocacy, that doesn't give us anything measurable. But if we say I want to be a better advocate, and the result is going to be I will be able to go online within 5 to 10 minutes anytime I want to do stuff and go to a site, or I will know 3 people I can turn to ask questions of that will help me. That's the concrete result that you want to have, and it ties back into your goals and objectives. So you identify your problems, then decide how you're going to resolve them and what change looks like. That's really an essential part that so many training programs miss at the individual level, the informal level, as well as the formal level. We leave our workplace, we go to an hour-long session or an hour-and-a-half session or a day-long session. And when we leave, we're sort of buried under so much information, we don't even know what to do next. So if we have a clear picture up front, I need this, my change will look like this, I will know I'm successful because I did that. You're setting yourself up for success, and you're setting up your learners when you're working with them for success also. A third tip that ties into this and alludes back to what I just said about how we get buried in a training session by too much: deliver only what is needed if you're doing training. And if you're doing the training for yourself, it's a self-guided program of, I want to be better at advocacy, so I want to know resources, I want to know people, I want to know how the legislative process in California works, I want to know who works with the different organizations, whether they are advocating for kindergarten through 12, whether they're advocating for collegiate level, whether they're advocating for communities or state or national. The point that you want to address here when you address those questions is, what do you need to know and what else is extraneous? We tend to try to put too much into a training session. The result is we remember nothing. It's neurological, folks. We know from research that is out there that we can read as learners and trainers and teachers that in a good session and a good day, we're lucky if we can assimilate 3 or 4 new main concepts. And on a really good day, you may pick up 3 or 4 subsidiary things. So if you're assuming that in any learning session, you can only pick up 3 new things and then a few things to support those, there's no point in having a 30 or 40 point lesson plan, nor is there any point in having a 30 or 40 point plan for yourself as somebody who's trying to train themselves on advocacy, because you're not going to remember it. So take those bite-sized chunks and sort of watch. If you go back to the video after this and you watch any part of this, notice how it was set up, where at the beginning we had a little bit of chat. I told you an opening story to kind of set things, and you know that you're going to get 10 tips, which is way more than you're going to remember, but I'm hoping that out of the 10 tips, there are 2 or 3 that resonate with you. You jot them down and you do something with them. You'll notice through this, it's not just going to be lecture format. We're going to talk about what you can do with this and how you approach them. So let's stop now and let's make this real. Tips 1, 2, and 3. Identify your learning problem, describe the results to be achieved, deliver only what is needed. How might you incorporate that into your own learning schedule right now if you were setting up a simple thing that you wanted to learn about advocacy? Any ideas? Suddenly the room gets very quiet. Another thing about teaching, training, and learning, folks, if you are doing this with others and you hit that moment that we're hitting right now where people are kind of like sitting back going, oh, I'm not quite sure what to do, don't rush it. Do not try to fill the silence. And Lori's asking the obvious thing. Please repeat the question. Yeah, the question is, we've looked at 3 tips so far on how you might approach learning for yourself or setting it up for others. What could you do immediately off these ideas of identifying a learning problem, describing results to be achieved, or delivering only what is needed for yourself or for training you're setting up? And Catherine's coming back with the idea, think about what type of advocacy I want to learn about. Exactly. And let's take that down the road so that Catherine walks away with a solid plan of action and everybody else watching this says, oh, I can do that too. So, Catherine, do think about the type of advocacy you want to learn about today, something meaningful, something you're really going to use, not a theoretical thing. What is one type of advocacy you want to learn about? The rest of you can be thinking the same thing or helping her out. Funding for libraries. Okay, let's get more specific. This is sort of a thing I picked up from a wonderful library consultant years ago when she talked about evaluation. You ask a question, you get an answer, and you keep asking the question, so what, until you get to the meaningful root of the problem. Sometimes it's pretty simple. You can do it in 2 or 3 rounds. Sometimes it takes 10 or 12 steps to get there. So we're going to talk about advocacy, and now she's talking, or Alameda County actually is saying funding for libraries. At what level? What specifically are we trying to fund? Advocacy is around issues. It's very specific. What's one funding issue that you would be involved in? Okay, so we've got state funding for county law libraries. Stay with that from Alameda County. State funding for, I'm sorry, my chat's moving so fast now, I'm losing track of it. I'm going to move back up because we're going to dig down until we get something that's manageable. That's so what question we're asking up front. State funding for county library programs. What's one specific program in a county law library that would need funding? And I'm seeing here, maybe this comes from somebody else from Alameda, programming and partnerships. Great. So now let's start digging into what really hurts here. Let's take either one or the other, programming or partnership. What is a specific program that needs funding or a specific partnership that needs funding? Lawyers in the library program. Wonderful. So if we get to lawyers in the library program, we can play this all day long, but you can see where we're going. We start off with this whole amorphous thing of, I want to be able to learn something and I want to learn about funding. Well, it's too broad a topic. Funding in law libraries. Now at least we've got a sector. Now we're down to a program, lawyers in the library program. And the final question for you to ask yourself in terms of setting up your learning goals for yourself and for the people you're teaching is, what does that produce? If you have a lawyers in the library program, what are they doing that make a difference in the community? And that's where you get down to the importance of telling your stories. So you can see where this goes. And again, if you want more of an explanation of storytelling, which is a whole lovely topic, we did that last month. Just go on the California Library Association YouTube channel and look for the session on storytelling. We've actually got 2 of them up. We did one last year and we did one this year. So look for a storytelling session in 2022, look for 2023. But in terms of what we're talking about today, getting our training going and how we decide what we can do that's meaningful and easy to accomplish, we've narrowed it down to a program. We want to make the case for the program accomplishes this. We want to make the case for why the funding is important and what the donor gets out of this so that it hooks back to that idea of the partnership. And then the result is going to be, actually, do me one more favor here, Alameda County. What does the lawyers in the library program produce that is tangible? That you can say, this lawyer helped this person to do this, and as a result, they were able to do that. Condense that into a sentence, because that's going to be the punchline that gives us our goals and objectives. I'm going to wait a few seconds for some kind of explanation that gives us the output, and then we're back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the session. So volunteer attorneys help people get ready for court. That gives us everything we need. It gives us a story we're going to tell to our potential funders. It reaches out to our potential audience if we're designing this for somebody other than ourselves. When we write the synopsis, as you see the course descriptions that go out for the Ursula Meyer sessions through California Library, we'll say, you're going to learn this, you'll be able to do this at the end of it. So if you're going to set up a training program for libraries in the library, you want to be able to say at the end of the session, library or volunteer attorneys will help people get ready for court. And you can test that very easily at the end of your sessions. At the end, instead of doing a formal evaluation, you circle back and say, okay, everybody, what are 3 things you picked up today? And as I always do at the end of these sessions, spoiler alert, I always ask, what will you do in the next week differently than you were doing before you got here? So you want to set up a training program. You've identified what it is. You've identified what the need is. You want to help volunteer attorneys prepare so that they can help people get ready for court. And at the end of it, the learners have to be asked, what will you do? And they need to feed back the information in the form of an action plan that's very simple. A lot of people turn this into a very hard, tedious, long-term evaluation process, it kills interest in it. Or in fact, in the last few minutes of a session, if you just ask those questions, ask people to jot down notes, and if you're working with a group that you are in continual touch with, you can circle back to them in a week or a few weeks and say, did you do it? And what will you do next? A great model for all of us as we set up our own individual training, teaching, learning endeavors, or set them up for other people, is to not only upfront say what you're going to do and make sure that people are coming to that session because they know that's what they're going to get, but have simple follow-ups. A model I very much admire has been around for around 15 years now. It was a group that went into different companies. They would do their trainings. The managers would be in the room with the learners themselves, and then it was set up in the workplace that as soon as they got back, they would apply what they had learned. The real killer deal in that was every Friday for a couple months, a simple email would go out to all the participants, and it had two questions. It would go out Friday afternoon, and it would say, what did you do with your learning this week? What will you do next week? The answers that came from the learners back to the people running the program were also seen by the managers, which created a perfect circle. The managers and the learners were in alignment. The managers were observing the students to make sure that what they learned was being applied, and the learners knew that it meant something. It wasn't just checking something off a box. It wasn't just looking at a bunch of PowerPoint slides and saying, done, I got my certificate, I can move on to something else. This showed that people cared. And if we apply that process to what we just did with the Alameda County Law Library situation, either informally for ourselves or formally with our learners, we're on to something. Let me stop there and ask, do you have any questions or any feedback, having just gone through this process in a very brief fashion? If you have no questions, just put no in the chat and we'll move on. But if you do have questions, unmute or put questions in and let's explore that. And the second thing is, was that process helpful to you? Did you get what you needed out of hearing that? Hold up just long enough to see. Good. And there's another part of our whole training, teaching, learning environment when we want to train advocates or train ourselves to be better advocates. We don't just put together a lesson plan, race through it, and at the end say, good, we showed all the slides, we're all done, now we can go and do something else. You want to have that moment of reflection and make sure that if you are the one transferring information and knowledge to somebody else, that they are absorbing it and they got it in a way that they can use it. Hence the simple thing of saying, did that make sense? Did you get something out of it? I don't think we do that often enough in training. As trainers, oftentimes we think we've got to be the brilliant person, which I'm never going to be, mind you, but we're supposed to be the brilliant person in the front of the room who leads everybody to a state of enlightenment. And folks, that isn't how it works. You already heard the idea that I quoted earlier, that about 90% of our learning is informal. So we don't really need somebody in the front of the room. We need to be together, conversationally, exchanging information and checking back frequently to make sure that the learner got what he or she or they needed. And if not, circle back with another explanation and keep going until we get it right. That's the heart of successful learning. So let's take a deep breath and let us reflect on the first three things that we've gotten here. And you know, I'm going back to my notes to make sure that I get them right too. So I'm not just doing this off the top of my head. Straight up front, you want successful learning as an advocate for yourself and others. Identify a concrete learning problem, describe the results to be achieved, what it's going to look like, what the different world's going to look like as a result of being there, and then deliver only what is needed. You do not need to teach somebody all the mechanical stuff of what goes into a TV if the goal is to be able to turn the television on. And that's what we need to do in training. Again, going back to my colleague, Sardik Love. Sardik says, we kill people with information. And sometimes as librarians, when people ask us a simple question, we know so much and it's all so beautiful. And we want to share that with everybody. But we have to, as trainer, teacher, learners for ourselves and others, identify what the essential information is and focus on that. And then say, if you want more information, here's where you can go, or you can come back to me for more. But keep it simple and keep it focused. Those are the first 3 points to getting us there. Questions or comments before we move on? Okay, hearing none. Tip number 4, now we're going to start getting into some of the fun mechanical things that I've seen over the years in training. This really worked for me too. Tip number 4 for me is create sustainable learning communities for advocacy. Again, create sustainable learning communities for advocacy. In plain English, that means don't try to do it all on yourself. If you are around colleagues that you see on a regular basis, set up some kind of format, some kind of mechanism where you can communicate regularly and in a way that works for everybody. If people are extremely busy, do not set up weekly meetings at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning when people are just coming back from their weekend. They're facing a new week and they're just torn in 20 different directions. Think creatively about how you can communicate with your colleagues. Again, you know, CLA has all kinds of stuff. You've got that legislative and advocacy committee that deals with issues and wants to hear from you about the issues that you have. You have the Ursula Meyer training committee or training program that was set up through a request through someone who knew Ursula, and that's there. And then we put the videos out. Think about what we're doing and turn that into what you can do. If you are doing training sessions and can record them and make them available to people who can look at them at their own time, you've expanded your reach. That's what we try to do with Ursula Meyer. One of the great learning communities that I've seen sprung up out of a massive open online course more than 10 years ago. It started out of Canada. The guy that started was Alec Koros. He started what he called the Educational Technology and Media Massive Open Online Course. The acronym for it was ETMOOC, E-T-M-O-O-C. To this day, you can still go online and find the ETMOOC site. You can see the 5 modules that went into that. You can see the recorded lectures that were highly interactive with the learners. You can see blog sites where the learners were blogging back and forth. I know that because I was one of those people. We had 1,500 people all over the world sign up for ETMOOC. It ran for 10 weeks as an experiment in what would happen if you did connective learning, which is just connecting to people and learning together. We did that for 10 weeks, and at the end of it, we assumed that was going to be the formal conclusion and we'd go on to something else. Alec put out something on Twitter because he was talking via Twitter to all of us as learners. That was one of our communication methods. And he says, thanks, everybody. It was nice working with you. ETMOOC is now over. And at the end of that, somebody tweeted back and said, it ain't over till we say it's over. That community that started as a 10-week, 5-module learning opportunity continues to this day with the learners still in touch with each other. We have annual reunions that we do online. And just recently, we started a new massive open online course, responding to the need for all of us to understand how ChatGPT works around education. So a bunch of us who were learners the first time around, designed the second MOOC and actually ran it in, I think it was March and April of this year. That too is online. The point of talking about this, even though it's not a library story, is it tells you that when you have learners who are engaged, the instructor almost becomes a facilitator who moves off to the side as the learners take control of their own learning. That's an important part of our learning and advocacy. If we identify the needs we have and we take control of how to solve those learning needs, fill those gaps, ask what hurts and fix it, then we're on the track to being very successful as advocates and encouraging others to be advocates with us. Nobody can turn down an idea to be with a winning group if they see that that winning group wants to include them. It takes us to issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, where you make it clear that you want other people in your group, you reach out to them, you accommodate them to the best of your ability, you find out what they need, where they are, when they're available, and you work around them. I think that ETMOOC model is a wonderful model, and I've seen it play out in a few other communities where people start with a very specific thing. Again, going back to the thing we said at the beginning, have your goals and objectives. You start with that, you determine what you can get with each other, you determine what the fun is that you can do, and then you let the group evolve and the learners themselves drive the process. Again, that's advocacy. We don't win people over by going out and saying, you should do this, you should fund this, you've been doing this, that's wrong, you should do that. We are locked in neurologically to a lot of our belief systems, and it's hard to change those. The way that we do affect change is to make ourselves appealing and to listen. One of our colleagues in this particular session said up front, she starts by listening. And we need to do that. We need to listen to what others want and need, see where we overlap with them and what we can do to draw them along. So again, tip number 4, be inclusive, Create sustainable learning communities for advocacy so that you can work with others and they will work with you. And it continues through the building of relationships over days, weeks, months, and years. That's where we provide our successes. So that sort of dances around the whole theme of what makes people come in the first place to advocacy, and how do we react to their learning needs? Question I'd like you to address here, either in chat or unmute yourself again. What makes learning compelling or engaging for you and for those you serve? Let's get a benchmark. Let's make it personal. If something interests us, then let us turn around and offer that to others. So the real question on the floor for you right now is, what makes learning compelling or engaging for you and those you serve? Lori says, my curiosity engaged, my input is valued. Absolutely. When you walk into a physical space or a virtual space like this, and somebody lectures nonstop and they don't pay attention to the fact that they're muted and you can't hear them, and you're trying to say, please, you're muted, unmute yourself so we can hear you. That's not going to engage us. But when we know that our input is valued, that our needs are valued because the facilitator of the session makes that clear, then we're onto something. So thanks, Lori, you really nailed it with that one. Catherine says, being able to see how I can apply what I'm learning. You know, nothing is better in a session like this than saying, are we achieving that? Here we've got two things up there. Let's just say, and you're not going to hurt my feelings if you say, no, let's fix it if it's a problem. But right now, Lori, is your curiosity continuing to be engaged by the process of the conversation that we're all having here? Wonderful. And Catherine, being able to see how I can apply what I'm learning. Can you, Catherine, already see how you can apply some of what you're learning today? Seeing an answer there, I'm going to just bounce back up and chat to the other comments that were coming in. So Catherine was saying, being able to apply, already responded there, and Debbie makes a comment, having a safe space, not a sage, and that's exactly right. When we set ourselves up to be the experts, we are setting ourselves up for failure almost from the beginning, because none of us brings complete expertise to the topic. What makes learning sessions like this, formally or informally, work is our ability to learn with and from each other. And I see from CH, when there is direct action I can take, something to do, read, research, anything I can do after to make it mine engages me, and there's a thumbs up there, so that's great. Catherine says, I'm already thinking about how I can engage library patrons in our events. Let's riff on that for a minute. Catherine, what is one thing you can think about, either from this session or because you've been inspired here, that you can do to engage library patrons in your events? Beautiful. More conversations about what they would like to see in an event. I have no surprise to you. I'm sure it shows through. I've done a lot of work with people all over the country in libraries talking about how you build partnerships. And the first thing we always start with is, when you go out to groups, don't initiate the conversation by telling them what you need. Initiate the conversation with a story that you hope will bring out what they need, or show them that you have shared interests, or even better, just start off saying, what hurts for you guys? What do you need help on? And once you start hearing that, you say, well, we also need help there. What can we do together? And I explicitly recommend that whenever we're working to build those kind of partnerships, whether they're with patrons or with funders or any other person that we want to partner up with, that we ask them up front, what is it that hurts and what can we do to help you with that? And the key word is we, rather than I can do that, or the library can do that, or you can do this. If we start with we, we're setting up partnerships in the assumption of the language we use. And I've seen magnificent results from those. Anybody? Oh, and Teresa also put a great comment into the chat about what can we do to, or what makes learning compelling when it addresses a specific need. So again, we're back to the first point here of identifying what hurts, identifying the need, the learning need to be addressed in our advocacy work, and making sure that we do address that effectively. Draw people in, give them time to think, give them time to reflect, and for us to reflect, and then together walk out with a concrete plan of action. Anybody else? What makes learning compelling or engaging for you and those you serve? Any other ideas here? Oh, we're already out of ideas. Time for a second cup of coffee for everybody if you're a coffee drinker. So let's stay on that theme, but with a little bit of a twist. I described to you how EdMOOC worked, where Alec, the instructor, set it up. He had weekly sessions. We were all tweeting back and forth, blogging together. There were guest speakers that were brought in. You could look at the archived recordings and you couldn't be there for the live recordings. And again, those exist to this very day. See, Lori's saying having a connection with other learners, and that absolutely is essential. It comes back to the idea of having a community of learning. Catherine says, I like when learning connects with something I already know or have experienced, the aha moments. Again, this is that whole laddering, scaffolding, stepping up sort of process. We know learning isn't in a vacuum. And we already know, because we've talked about it briefly, that you can't absorb too much in any one session. So if you give a few points and you give people a few days or a week to reflect on it, and then you come back and you do something that builds on that, it's exactly what Catherine's getting at. It's an iterative process. It is a cumulative process. So you connect what you're doing now to what you're going to do. And then you work in the other direction when you're on your next step, connected back to what you learned in previous lessons. If you're doing self-study, like watching an Ursula Meyer video, if you see the session on storytelling and it makes you think, well, how could I take storytelling into writing a pitch? Then you see that we've also got a video on how to write your pitch letters. And there's something in there also, I think, in that same session about writing elevator pitches and delivering elevator pitches. So you will learn at your own speed and you help learners learn at their speed. And flexibility becomes a part of the process. There's Lori again with the same thing I was just saying, the iterative learning thing, step by step, adding on cumulatively so we get better and better. The good news is, if you're a lifelong learner, like so many of us are, it never stops. It's lovely. The bad news is, if you hate learning, you're in bad shape, because it never stops. There's always something new to learn as situations change. And as our instructors change, our materials change, as our resources change. Let's circle back to the second part of the two-part question I'm trying to get out here, which is, what can you adapt from the EdMOOC model of learning, that whole thing of building a community over a long period of time because the learners kind of took over? What can you see there that you might apply in your own learning for yourself or for the people that you are facilitating learning for? Oh, he's got a great answer. Bottom-up learning, changing the top-down modality. Exactly. I love a term. I'm surprised we're as far into the session as we are, and I haven't used it yet, but a term I picked up from Alec and the others was, we saw ourselves as co-conspirators in learning. It sort of wiped out the idea that there was any one person who hierarchically was above everybody else. It was clear that Alec provided the structure, but within that structure, all of us had contributions to make. We were co-conspirators in the learning process as well as co-conspirators in the teaching process. And that continues to this day. As I mentioned, 10 years after the original EdMOOC, we did EdMOOC 2, and it was the learners themselves as co-conspirators taking on more of what Alec did on the original round. And we hope down the road that if it continues, that others will pick up where we left off and will continue to have that community grow and adapt to the changing circumstances. Anybody else, things you can pull out of that whole approach, that co-conspirator approach that worked for EdMOOC, and how it might work for you as an individual or work with those people you work with that need your advocacy chops as you teach them how to be better advocates? Assuring you I have not frozen. If you're watching the video, I'm just waiting, giving people a little chance to think and a chance to respond. Can't emphasize enough. As a facilitator of learning, you do your learners no favors if you pop a question, wait 5 seconds, and then give the answer and move on, because they haven't had a chance to think. there's a two-pronged approach to this by waiting that uncomfortable 15 or 30 seconds for people to respond. The first thing is they get to think, and that's good. The second thing is there's always going to be somebody who hates silence. And after about 15 or 30 seconds, they think, I can't stand this. I'm going to say something just so we can move on. And if you're aware of that and you can make yourself comfortable with it, it's a way to make sure conversations happen rather than lectures happen. So again, I'm going to come back to that second question and give us about 30 seconds. So somebody can say, I can't stand the silence. What can you pick up from the MOOC model that could work for you in your learning efforts for yourself or for the people you work with? Anybody? Thanks, Catherine. I'm not sure yet, but I like thinking about this. Maybe ask more questions. Absolutely. There's a real art to asking questions. You're probably aware of the difference between open and closed questions. The open question means that there's a lot of room for people to respond. Closed question is a yes or no. You ask a long, windy question that takes you 2 minutes to get out, and the person goes back with no, and you go, well, that really didn't get me very far. Asking the right question can lead us down so many fruitful paths. And it's an essential part of any learning that we do. You really want to craft your questions well up front, but you also want to develop your skills to think in the moment as you watch things come through a chat, as we do in a live session like this, or audibly face-to-face when we're on site together. You hear questions and it makes you want to ask another question that promotes the conversation in ways that are fruitful and get you toward the specific goals and objectives that you had for the session, either that you set up for yourself or you set up with your co-conspirators in learning, so you walked out with a meaningful experience. So absolutely, Catherine, asking more questions and asking really effective, open questions that stimulate thought and promote inclusivity rather than exclusivity. Nobody wants to be part of a clique. They look at the clique and say, I can go on to other places like that. It has to be inclusive, has to be open, has to be encouraging, it has to feel safe. Okay, so as we move from the first 4 tips that we've talked about and move into other things, another side tip that leads us to tip number 5 is the idea of change it out a little bit. If you've been talking a lot and having conversations as we've been having, that can start to get boring. And at a certain point, neurologically, we start to shut down and get bored. But if we do something different, it picks us right up. So the different thing we're going to do is I am going to go back to the slide deck and look at tip number 5, which is talking about creating sustainable global classrooms, and see what that means. I think I can do this better visually than just by describing it to you. So let's get the slides up and let's move down to the deck. As soon as I can get my advanced slide to go here, I'm going to blast through this and get us up to this guy. So sustainable classrooms for formal and informal situations. Technology has given us a lot of possibilities these days. It used to be 10 or 15 years ago that you were either face-to-face with people or you watched some kind of recording online, or maybe you had some kind of a telephone conference call, and we started getting into video conferencing. But now more and more, we have this idea that formal and informal classrooms can operate at a global level. And the only limitation here is whatever our imagination sets up for us and stops us from doing. Our physical classroom with a simple laptop and a projection system and a speaker system allows what is being shared in other places, what's happening in that room, to be shared in other places. Now today, for the most part, as far as I can tell, everybody is in their own place, either at their own laptop or in a room. But if you set up things in advance with people so that you can have a live central place, for example, if I were in a room with you at a California Library Association conference, and if we set up a Zoom connection for people that couldn't be there, and we set up a projection system in that room so that people coming on our screen would appear on a big screen in that room so everybody in the audience could see them, and you have a microphone so that the people off-site can hear what's being said in the room, and then a speaker system in the room so that anybody off-site who speaks through Zoom, their voice is projected, we create a virtual classroom without much expense. Now, that all sounds very complex, and if you've never tried that, up front, the setup can seem daunting, but all it really takes is practice and some basic technology, like a laptop with a decent camera, and an existing speaker set in a room, or just some portable speakers you hook up to your laptop. I've been doing this for over 10 years, and the technology keeps getting better and better and less expensive. When we talk about our classrooms, let us imagine that they are no longer just those kind of places where you walk into a space, you see each other. They can be that. They can be what we have today with everybody online in a virtual space, or it can be that kind of hybrid thing I was just talking about, where some of us are together in a room. Several other people may be in another room, so they're all sharing a laptop or a projection system. You may have a few individuals around, but it raises the question, so how big are our classrooms? And the answer is as big as you need them to be. They can be global if you have good bandwidth, if you have good equipment, and if you've got the tech savvy ability to do rehearsals and make sure the technology is going to work up front. And when the tech fails, because it will fail at some point, knowing what your backup plan is, that really helps us. Now, if we want to create a virtual facility, and that's tip 6, create virtual faculties for yourself. That's simply understanding that you don't have to go out and hire a bunch of experts to teach you about advocacy. You can look at resources that are there and create your own curriculum and your own faculty. I've said it many times, and it's worth making the point again, that if you go to YouTube, you've got the Ursula Meyer videos. When I was first setting up things for the Ursula Meyer program and trying to do kind of a training handbook for people that would give them resources, my starting point was to go and see what other libraries and other library facilitators had done on the topic of advocacy. And we created a list that exists to this day on the California Library Association site. If you go to that site and you look for advocacy resources, you'll find a whole page that needs some updating, frankly. I need to get back to that, but still, there are great resources there. You find videos from other trainers, you find articles, you find some interviews that we did. In the first year of the Ursula Meyer program, we interviewed several activists up and down the state. We did this by Google Chat, so that at the end of each of those interview sessions, I had a transcript that I lightly edited, and I just posted the transcript. So you can read people like Patty Wong, our great active CLA member and a past ALA president. You can read Patty talking about advocacy. You can read Deborah Doyle, who's been active in Friends of the Libraries and at ALA and CLA for many years and still is on the Legislative and Advocacy Committee. You read Deborah talking about this. So you go to YouTube, you can have Zoom meetings, you can go to the Advocacy Tools page, which is down there in very short form at the lower left-hand corner of that screen. You go to the ALA site on public policy and advocacy, and there are tons of resources there. And you can also go to United for Libraries, which is a project that guides you. So right there on one screen, you can see you don't need a lot of freshly created material if you're trying to train yourself. You have these and many other things. And if you want to get really creative, you can set up sessions where if you see a good video that you want to use, there's nothing that would stop you from setting up an advocacy training session with your colleagues face-to-face or online, where either together you watch one of those videos and discuss it, or you use some jargon that I really love, this whole flipped classroom model that was floating around a few years ago, where people can watch a video ahead of time and then get together for a discussion of how can we apply that. And then you make it manageable and accountable by saying, a week from now, we're going to ask you what's one thing you did as a result of that. I frankly do not see a lot of people doing this yet, and I think it's an underexplored way of learning. But if we use a flipped classroom model where you watch something and then you interact and then you put it to action, any of these resources give you that stuff, and you don't have to spend the time creating it. You just have to do the simple thing of looking at it to make sure it's what you need, and then writing up the questions you're going to ask or the discussion points you're going to make with your colleagues and run with it. We can create the virtual faculty, and we don't need a huge budget to do that. There's the screenshot from the Ursula Meyer advocacy training thing. I think this pretty much brings us up to date. There was a ChatGPT session that is on the CLA site, but not yet on this playlist. But if you go to this playlist, you can create your own curriculum and share that with your colleagues. Finally, the California State Library site is a great site to go to. If you're interested in something like lunch at the library, for example, you start at their lunch at the library site, and there are all your stats, your facts and figures that help you to understand what you need to know about that. But that's just the beginning of the process. When you dive a little deeper into that, using this as a resource for yourself, there are pictures here that tell the story because you see the impact. It goes back to what the exercise we did earlier in today's session, where we talked about, all right, the law library. So what's a funding thing you need there? It's a specific project. And what does it do? It creates this kind of impact. We go on the California Library site from the facts and figures to a picture of the client served. That's visual storytelling at its best. If I'm trying to convince somebody that lunch in the library is worth funding or worth being part of, all the facts and figures in the world are not going to take them there. What really gets them engaged, I believe, is the picture of the kids that are benefiting from. You say, that's what your advocacy efforts and your support will do. And that takes us back to storytelling as part of advocacy, an important thing to keep in mind. And finally, they've got a resource page that gives you all sorts of stuff. So if you wanted to train yourself all the way or have others train themselves, you don't have to set up sessions yourself. You can send them to the site and they can look at the specific things they need. You can see some of the headings on there, how to contact them, the listserv they have, their planning and policies, finding their site app and programming support. All this is there for you. You don't have to create it from scratch. So as we talk about tips 5 and 6, creating sustainable global classrooms formally and informally, using the technology we have that's pretty much cost-free once you have your equipment and once you have your bandwidth or your internet connection set up, and then you create your virtual faculty rather than having to design everything yourself. That puts you in business, and it really takes you further down the road than we might have otherwise imagined we could be taking ourselves. So let me catch up with myself here, and let's see. We're going to go to a discussion thing. Let me just get this off the screen there so that, again, we can see each other. And the request here is if you want to see each other, unmute yourself, put your cameras on. Otherwise, just keep doing what we're doing in the chat. Now, let me do a double check here because I know we had a problem last time around. Is anybody having trouble unmuting themselves? I want to make sure that that's not an impediment to our conversation here.
No.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so this discussion, based on what we just did, what resources do you currently use for your own learning? We've talked a little bit about this, but let's get specific. What sites do you go to? This is a two-pronged question. One is for you to share what you're using, and two, it's for you to learn from others what they're using so that you walk away from this session with ideas of what's out there for you beyond what we've already talked about. So the basic question, what resources do you currently use for your own learning? Specific people, specific books, specific websites. Let's get some of that out there. It's a Library of Congress, general learning. That's nice. Debbie has Library Juice has great learning opportunities. I haven't even looked at that. Debbie, can you tell us just a little bit more about what Library Juice offers? Okay, so webinars like this one, newsletters from library groups. That's a really nice thing. And if anybody else has other newsletters that they see on advocacy issues, let's share those in here. I see Beth is putting, oh, thank you, Beth. She's got the libraryjuiceacademy.com website. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Beth is the executive director of CLA. So if you've got questions about the different aspects of what CLA is doing legislatively, feel free to pop those into the chat for Beth too. Other resources, let's keep this going. What specific ones would you recommend or do you find useful to yourself? Everylibrary.org, absolutely, Lori. Thank you so much for that. John Kraska, Pat Sweeney, all the others over there, they do such wonderful work and they have so many free resources up. We've been very lucky to have Pat Sweeney from Every Library do a couple of the Ursula Meyer sessions. And I'm just in the beginning stage of trying to reach out to him to see if we can get a third one going. I can't speak for Patrick because I don't know what his schedule is, but I'm hoping to get it in before the end of this year. If not, early next year, we'll have Patrick back with another topic there. And the ones that he's done already are clearly marked on the YouTube playlist that we have. I think Beth put something in chat that just raised by me. Let me move my chat back up here. Oh, and Beth put into chat an article from Library Juice that looks like it's assessing and advocating for early childhood services.
It's just an example of one of the courses that I'm interested in because I teach early childhood literacy in public libraries. But I also wanted to kind of promote our state library partnership endeavors, which is the Continuing Education in California Libraries, which offers an enormous amount of training opportunities to the California community, whether you're a CLA member or not. So if you're looking for opportunities, you should check out, they have a weekly newsletter that comes out. And if you need any more information, you can visit our website or be free to, just send me an email and I'll connect you.
And that goes under the acronym CALL, right?
Yeah, call, because nobody wants to say the big long thing.
It's that whole thing. I'm only going to learn 3 things today. I'm not going to memorize what CALL stands for. Thank you, Beth. Anybody else with resources? Yeah, I think some others have popped in here. Again, I just need to move my chat window down a little bit. Yeah, all the free webinars on the ALA division sites, CLA, even ones shared in LinkedIn. And again, LinkedIn has wonderful things. I haven't gone to them specifically for advocacy, but it's certainly something that would be well worth looking at, because there may be some things that are not specific only to advocacy that you can learn from and draw back into your own efforts. Again, there's a tip for us, one that wasn't among the top 10 I was trying to list for you, but be creative, be adaptable, look for things that may not be specifically listed for advocacy or for libraries, but that you can, by watching or reading, adapt them. Great example of that in action is when I read Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering, about 1.5 years ago. I went into the book understanding that Priya was writing a book about what makes gatherings successful. She's talking about parties, social gatherings, things like that. I picked up the book because I thought training sessions in important ways are gatherings, and maybe there's something in Priya's book that I can adapt into training. Well, lo and behold, there it was. She talked about how to engage people from the very beginning with stories rather than facts and figures, and it changed the way that I did training just by adapting a book on social gatherings into books for training gatherings. We need to have our eyes open to that sort of adaptation at all times. I think we're pretty good at that. I think librarians are very creative, but we do need to remind ourselves that that's a way to go. I see that we see from CH, this was specific to school libraries, but there was another advocacy project I did develop recently. She's got in the chat there, elearning.ala.org. For those of you watching the video and may not be able to see the chat, I'll read this kind of slowly in case you want to try to catch it later. elearning.ala.org/local/catalog/view, oh, this is getting to be long, /product.php, product ID equals 609. And if you're watching the archive version, just freeze it, back up, and take that step by step until you get it. This is how we want to be able to in the moment, see how to do things and make sure they're useful. Even as simple a thing as thinking about an audience for something when you're doing a live session and you know it's going to be recorded, making it easy for people to go back to it later and access it. I know that maybe it was CH, but somebody had mentioned early on that they were at school libraries and they were wondering if there were advocacy tips. Anybody who works with school libraries have tips on other resources that they've seen that are useful for advocates at the school library level? And Beth, do you remember Tom, his last name? He was a person that we did an advocacy session with. He works at the elementary K-12 level, if I remember correctly.
You're testing my memory.
It may be Kaun. I'm trying to remember his organization too. Well, if anybody's interested and you want to do a follow-up, email me afterwards. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's today or if you're seeing this a year from now, email me and ask me for more information about Tom. And I think his last name is Kaun on K through 12. And I'll check that out for you. It's Tom is part of our legislative committee. And I'm just spacing right now on his contact information in his organization, which is terrible because we've worked together for a while, but it's one of the California Library advocate groups that are out there.
And I just put in the chat the ALA advocacy, basically advocacy toolkit for school libraries. So ALA is a great source of information as far as, advocacy and also frontline advocacy toolkits. So this one's for school libraries. If you're interested, I put the link in there.
Thanks. We may have that on the advocacy page I mentioned earlier. So again, if you're those of you that are interested in looking for more resources, check out the California Library Association's advocacy page. And if you look down the whole list of things there will be a link to advocacy tools. And that's where sites like the one that Beth just put up and many, many others should be available to you. And if you see stuff that you think we should have up there, email me directly. It's paul@paulsignorelli.com. Pretty easy to find online. Email me those resources. And as we do updates to that page, I'll take off the stuff that's gotten outdated and put in new things so that stays a living, up-to-date, useful resource for everybody. Anybody else? Coming back to that same question about what resources do you usually use or do you currently use for your own learning? Any others that we've missed that you want to share with others? And let's flip that around for a very quick follow-up here, again, with the idea that this is how you instill positive results of a learning opportunity. What resources can you incorporate from this discussion into your own learning and training efforts? Anybody seeing things that they now want to use? Oh, I love that library picture that we're seeing right now from CH. Are you showing us all the resources you've got for us?
No, this actually isn't my office, and I apologize for not having my video on earlier. I was in the car, so I didn't want to be a distraction. And because I was on Zoom from my phone, I just realized now that my Zoom just says CH, but I'm actually Katrina, by the way.
Katrina, thank you.
Oh, there's an actual name there. I was trying to figure out how to change that from my phone, but I gave up. So yeah, I'm actually at a colleague's house who is a historian. He specializes in Native American tribal law, and he does research at the National Archives in various states, and these are all of his books.
That's wonderful.
A very specific library here.
Very inspiring to all of us. And Catherine's got in response to the question about what can you incorporate in, call and every library. Absolutely. If you walk away with nothing else, just having access to those two wonderful resources that are so learning centric, and especially in the case of every library, so advocacy centric. We learn from our peers. They mentor us, and they're never even going to know they're mentoring us because we don't even have to talk to them face to face or through email or chats. Their stuff is there. The information's there. We can take it, run with it, and apply it. Everybody's happier as a result of that. So let's move to a last set of tips. I'm going to go back to the slide deck to put some of this up because there are some project names in there that I want you to be able to jot down if that appeals to you. So getting our screen share up there, moving ourselves down to that slide. Wow, look at all those slides you didn't have to look at. There we go. Let's make this full screen. One more. And there we go. All right, so tips 7 through 10. Number 7 starts with the idea of knowing your challenges. How do you do that? You read things that come out from your best peers. Now, circling back one last time to my colleague Sardeek Love. He's a trainer who works with a lot of corporations. He doesn't do much work with libraries, but what he does for them is completely adaptable for what we do. He puts together a report once a year based on his own research. He travels all over the world doing training sessions for corporations and for a lot of other big organizations. And as he goes and does trainings, he asks a series of questions that involve what challenge are you facing? And each year, early in the year, he puts together the top 10 that he's identified through his own research. This report came out about 2 months ago. You can see that long URL toward the bottom of that. But if you want to get to him quickly, just go online and Google Sardik Love and Training, or Sardik Love and Top 10 Challenges. It should take you to his website. You'll have to sign up to get his newsletter or something like that. It's all free. And as a result of that, you can get a copy of the 2023 report. There are some things in there that I think are really nice for us to be looking at in terms of the challenges he sees and that we face in our own learning opportunities. The number one challenge always remains participant engagement. Like, people don't know how to engage others. And that raises the question. Let me see if I can get my chat window going so I can see the results from this. Usually when this is up, I can't see the chat window at the same time I'm seeing this, but here we go. Good. So if you want to respond in chat, I'll see that. But participant engagement. So Sardik talks a lot about that and how that's so important in making learning effective. Loaded question. Has this session in any way managed to keep you engaged? Simple yes or no. And if no, then I'm wondering why you stayed with us a whole hour, but I'm hoping that most of the answers there are yes. And let's think for a minute about what's making this engaging for you. What are the elements that we have done together as co-conspirators that have made this session engaging enough for you to stay with us for a whole hour so far, and hopefully for the last 30 minutes of it? Any tips? Share new resources. Absolutely. The whole sharing thing is important. And Teresa also says that it's new to me. So yeah, an important thing is make sure that when you're setting up your goals and objectives, that you're covering new material rather than just reviewing things. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sharing with people things they already know, because it's a way of reminding us of what we know and may not be doing. But you also want to have a good balance of things that are new to you with some reviewing that builds that scaffolding and stepping up, building upon what you already knew. Elizabeth is curious about what others thought about the topic. Anybody else? What's making this engaging to you? Think about the mechanical things. Asking for direct responses. That makes the session more active. Sardik is big on that, saying, you want an engaging session? Ask questions, and ask the right questions. If we do more of that, rather than getting up in front of a room or a virtual room like this and thinking that all we have to do is talk and give pointers, we miss what's really fun. And Teresa has also tips on how to share information effectively. For me, it's surprising because I've been doing this so long, it just comes so natural to me. But when I hear somebody like Sardik say that participant engagement is the #1 challenge facing trainers and learners, like, why in the world is that such a challenge? And I don't think it's because we don't have resources. I think it's because we're not creative enough. I found a long time ago, and I use it to this day, it seems to work. That whole thing of just asking questions, being engaging. Now I'm using the same term to define what we're talking about, but to keep people interested. You want to make sure that you are reacting to them and constantly checking in, that you're giving people things that are useful to them and that they can use. And a lot of people simply don't do that. They get on, they show a bunch of slides with way too much text on the slides. The pictures themselves are boring, so that starts to put people to sleep, and they don't vary it up a little bit. You'll notice very specifically in the way the session was set up, at least every 10 to 15 minutes, there's a break to discuss and figure out how we're going to apply things. There is a difference in how we do things, like bringing up the deck or not bringing up the deck, talking to each other, or just having a few seconds to think and react to that. I think participant engagement is a huge problem, but only because we're not consciously addressing it. And if all of you walk away from today's session thinking about the things that you liked about it, and then using that yourself with the people you work with, we're going to have a better training environment. By the same token, if there was anything that turned you off about today's presentation, I often feel that when I go to other presentations, and I learn from that. I think, I didn't like that. Don't do that to others. So if I did something that you didn't like, don't do that to others, and do me a favor afterwards and say, you know, when you did this, that wasn't really good because of that, and it would have helped me if you'd done this. We all get better by listening and reacting and improving. One other thing here, Teresa says, allowing time for thinking. It's so important, but it rarely occurs. So among the challenges, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but participant engagement is the number one thing. The third thing that he notices about in these top 10 challenges for trainers, and that's something we want to think about when you're training, is time constraints. People don't have a lot of time to do a training session. So we better make sure that it's timely, that it only has what's necessary, and that it keeps people wanting more and knowing what to do with the information they got. Fifth point on there, number 5, actually, poorly designed courses, where you put together something that doesn't in any way meet your goals and objectives. So now we're back to the very starting point of this session. Define those goals and objectives and design your lessons to that and that only, and only put in what you need. And a final thing is, he talks about the idea of dealing with change. Learning is change. You came because something was not right from your point of view about what you're doing, or you had the sense that you lacked something that you could get from a session like this. But it does involve changing from one thing to another. And we don't often enough, I think about the impact of having to give up something to do something new. On a training session like this, there's really not a lot of risk because nobody's holding a gun to your head saying, you will do this or you will lose your job, or you will do this or you will get a bad performance evaluation. This is the best kind of learning. You came because you were curious. You came because you wanted to pick something up. You can take what's useful. You can leave what's not useful. But whenever we're talking about change, and especially if we're working with a group that's feeling vulnerable or a little off center, we want to make sure we're acknowledging that in doing the thing we're teaching them to do, they're going to say goodbye to something, and it's okay to mourn the loss of that. We just want to make sure at the end of the process that whatever they're losing was more than compensated for by what they gained. So all these things are in Sardik's report, and I think he's got a video online that goes with that talks about it more. Highly recommend this if you're interested in the side of what do I face as a trainer? What are the issues I'm facing, and what can I do to get around them? Let us see if we can move on to our next tip here. Sorry, I'm just having some problems this morning with getting things to advance. All right, so tip number 8, we've circled around this a lot and just say it explicitly, that engagement is everything. An unengaged learner is a learner that is going to walk away sooner than later, and we can't afford that. People's time is too valuable. So make sure that when you're designing your training, you're doing everything possible to create opportunities for people to interact with you in the most positive of levels. That keeps it going. Design for success. And again, let me stop long enough so you can just look at the keywords that are up in this graphic that I found. These are things we want to think about. And again, this is more or less riffing on what Sardik was talking about, designing for success. Make sure that everything you do takes you toward your goal. If you see that you've got a part of a module that is going off on a topic you thought was interesting, but it does not in any way meet the goals and objectives you set up, take it out. Save it for a different lesson. Put it in a blog piece if it's interesting but not applicable. But again, remember, people are only going to remember a few things. If you give them too much, you feel good that you shared a lot, but it doesn't do any good if people can't remember it. And finally, dealing with change and learning this change is what I alluded to a minute ago. Final tip is make sure that there is room to acknowledge what people give up when they take on something new. If you're helping them to become better advocates and it involves change for them or for the people that they know, the communities they're in, make sure that you are taking into account the repercussions of that change for the community served and for the people involved and for yourself. So let's get rid of the slides, back to ourselves. And let's do a quick useful, actually, let me check and make sure I didn't miss anything in chat, which I apparently haven't. Let's do one last exercise here. Think now about an advocacy effort that you're involved in or that you would like to be involved in sometime within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Give about 30 seconds to identify an advocacy effort that you're involved in or that you want to be involved in the next 3 to 4 weeks. If you're at home watching the video, same for you. Jot down your idea because we're going to do a quick exercise with it. All right, with that in mind, thinking about who you would have to train or what you have to learn to be successful in that, write down one objective, the big thing you want to be able to do, and write down at least write down the goal, the big thing you want to be able to accomplish. Like, I want to get more funding for my library, or I want to fund lunch at the libraries. I want to fund law in the libraries, whatever it is you're looking at. And write at least one concrete, measurable objective that produces something that you can say, we were successful. That's the thing I want you to take away from the session today. So take about a minute or so, a couple minutes to write down the topic you've got, the advocacy goal, the goal that you have, and then an objective that's measurable so that you know what you're going to do to increase your own learning or the learning of somebody you're supporting. And let's see if I can do this. Yeah, I can. I'm going to pause the recording while people are writing this so that those of you at home don't have to sit there in a minute of silence. But if you're at home, just freeze your own screen and then we'll come back in about a minute and we'll continue the conversation. All right, so the magic of the internet. Those of you that are watching the archive version, that's just 2 or 3 minutes where the people here in the live session had a chance to jot down ideas. We'll read them, we'll do a quick debrief. I'm hoping that you had a chance yourself to write down something. If not, again, just freeze this until you've got those things written down and then come right back into it. So moving up through the chat. See, I'm seeing one from Debbie that says, I want to connect with more local schools to get tours of the library and cards in student hands during the library card sign-up month. So as she thinks about that, and she thinks about the objectives about what she's going to do, she may want to set a certain number of cards that she wants to see done. She may, by the same token, it's measuring it just in a different way, how many students she wants to bring in at a minimum level. But she's thinking about this in a teaching, training, learning setting. She wants to think about objectives that make it possible for her to design a lesson that will meet that specific need in the smallest amount of time. So that's a really good start in terms of getting that there. Moving down to the next one, Catherine Cooper is saying, asking for direct response. Oh, I'm sorry, I went way too far, going back to what was up there before. The joys of working with chat and trying to do it live. So we've got this one, coordinate with teen volunteers from the Teen Council, teach them about advocacy and help them. Sorry, I'm messing up here in terms of my being able to see all of a chat message. At the library card, coordinate with teen volunteers, teen council, teach them about advocacy, help them connect with other teens to build a collection, give a dedicated space at the library to work on zines as a group. Another one is promoting, I think it's Katrina, promoting the value and relevancy of school libraries, especially school librarians within my city's district. I'm thinking where I can get this going online to create support or going to a school board meeting to speak. It's a tragedy to see these positions lost. I was really proud that my city, and I'm losing the last part of that for some reason. Maybe that's as much of the message that got in. Beth, if you could see more of that message, I'm seeing only, I was proud that my city had. Is there more to that?
Potential teacher librarians, but that program is being stripped, which has been happening for the past 30 years, sadly, in different places.
Thank you. I don't know why my chat didn't want to bring that up, but thank you for jumping in and doing that. So we see here some ideas for the kind of things that we want to do. And at least a couple of you have got ideas that you can take back and workshop. And again, it's an essential part of any training, teaching, learning endeavor. We don't just say theoretically, here's 10 tips or here's 3 tips and here's the things that we're going to do. You actually walk out with an action plan and a commitment to do things. So that takes us to the final question I usually ask in a session like this. I'm going to ask it again today for obvious reasons. What is one thing you will do differently in the next week as a result of having been part of this conversation?
You know, Paul, while you were going through your slides and everything, and I know this is not probably an advocacy thing, but I feel that the way you present is very effective. And I think that a lot is lost when someone's trying to advocate by either having a PowerPoint that's so laden with information that, you know, you've lost your stakeholders before you even begin to speak. And I think one of the things I've come away from, you know, several of your sessions is to create better presentations and to cater them for my particular stakeholders. Like I would never take a totally PowerPoint laden into a school board meeting and try and do a presentation because their attention span are like gnats. So, but I do think that you've given some really good ideas to how to present the information, not just, you've got your charging points now with what you want to do in an advocacy plan, but how you're going to present it. So I think that's a really valuable thing to take away from this session as well, is that it's all in the presentation as well.
Thank you, Beth. For those that really want to delve more into what she was just talking about, I'll say straight up, one of the great influences for me in the direction that I've gone and that she's commenting on, Cliff Atkinson's book, Beyond Bullet Points. Again, the author, Cliff Atkinson. The book is Beyond Bullet Points. A graphic illustrator introduced me to that book around 2007 or 2008, saying, the mistake we make with PowerPoint is that we use it the way it was designed with all those words on the screen, which is just awful. Cliff's book talks about the idea that with your slides, you want to try to thematically choose images that go together, even if it's like certain color palettes that you look for or certain images. Using Cliff's book, I realized if I start with a blank PowerPoint slide rather than one of their templates, I'm already about 75% down the road that I want to be on, because I don't have the urge or the inclination to put 5 or 6 bullet points up. His style is very simple. And you saw it on a few of the slides that I showed you, a few words at the top, not repeating what you're going to say, but just prompting people to understand the general theme, and a striking image. It may not be absolutely clear why it's up there at the beginning, but by the end of the conversation, people see how that image ties into what you're doing. And it becomes what a friend of mine calls a memory anchor. When you think of that image, it brings back the idea. Oftentimes at the end of something, if I'm doing it, especially face-to-face on site with people, I'll have a final set of slides at the end of a presentation that will take 4 or 5 of the strongest images. I'll repeat those and repeat the main points to, again, remind people of what we've learned, hoping that that memory anchor of the image and the words repeated is so much more effective than just 5 bullet points saying, here's what I wanted you to take away. So we have to be creative. We have to run with it. We have to look at people like Atkinson and so many others that are out there. Beth, thanks for the opening to talk about that. See if I can go back to chat now and see what's come in terms of things that people are talking about. And so I've seen from Catherine, be more active in searching for advocacy groups and find ways to engage. Absolutely. You heard some of the best ones mentioned. I bet did a great job of talking about some of the ones that we're all very fond of. Let's see if there's any, Beth, am I missing anything, or is that the only comment that's in there so far of things
That's
people?
the only comment since the one about the school librarians, the credentialed librarians being stripped.
Got it. So anybody else, something we'll do differently as a result of having been here today? He's doing it again. He's leaving uncomfortable silence, so somebody will break the silence with an answer. Teresa, I'll share more stories. And that is a lovely way to draw a session like this to a conclusion. You have stories. You see them every day. They pull at your heartstrings. They inspire you to do the best that you can do and find the best in yourself, so that rather than succumbing to cynicism and hopelessness, you say, I can make a difference. I can reach out to people. I can help them. And if I'm in training, teaching, learning, I can have a substantial impact on them by just sharing with them things that inspire them, that they will pass on to someone else and someone else and someone else. So I hope as a result of what you saw here, A, you'll go share some of those stories. B, you'll look at what you can do to be more effective as a trainer, teacher, learner. And C, you'll get more involved with CLA and all the other wonderful organizations that are out there advocating for the kind of communities that we want, where we transform our dreams into the reality of wonderful communities that function in a way that serve everybody best. Last shot at questions. Was there anything I missed that you wanted to cover today? If not, I'll do 2 things. I'll stop the recording. So for those of you watching this after the fact, thanks for watching. Hope you come back. Hope you use the archives. And the second thing I'll do is I'll assure you, as soon as I stop the recording, if there are questions you wanted to ask but didn't want to capture on camera, I'll stay at least for a few minutes and we can continue the conversation. With that said, thanks, everybody. Hope to see you again soon.